All right, welcome, my friends, to a members-only stream. We are talking about the laws of thought. And what do we mean by the laws of thought? Well, we can understand the laws of physics and how the physical world interacts and the mechanics behind it. But what about the laws of thought? Can we understand the metaphysics of existence? And that's exactly what we're going to be taking a look at today. And what we're going to do is something a little bit different. We're going to be taking a look at a video here. And again, this video comes from mindmatters.ai, which is, as always, really great website. I highly recommend it. But the article is called Consciousness Observes Different Laws from Physics. So it's talking about basically like the laws of consciousness or the laws of mind and contrasting those to the laws of physics. But there's a video attached to this and I haven't seen the video. So let's see what this is about. It says, last week at Closer to Truth, host Robert Lawrence Kuhn interviewed British philosopher and pastor Keith Ward on what's the stuff of mind and brain. Ward is an idealist philosopher who believes that the material universe is an expression or creation of a supreme mind, namely that of God's. Okay, so I don't know anything about Keith Ward, but you can see there's some similarities to what we talk about and what he is proposing. So Keith Ward is a pastor and philosopher. Keith Ward is an idealist philosopher. And for those who remember, idealism is the opposite of materialism. Materialism says that everything is matter. That's it. Just material things, nothing else. Idealism, it's got the word idea right in there, says that everything is mental. Everything is mind, not matter. Matter is an illusion of the mind, just like how a dream is an illusion of matter that the mind generates. Everything in reality is actually mental. It is interesting, though, that I find it so often that people who are idealists, who believe that the universe is mental, like it says he's a pastor. I'm not sure if he's a Christian or what he considers himself. But it's unfortunate that it seems like quite often idealist philosophers, at least today, become theists in some capacity. So I'm not exactly sure what he means by God, but he believes that the universe, the material universe, is an expression or creation of a supreme mind, namely that of God's. Now, we do agree with this, but of course, I can't know what he believes based on a single sentence. But the difference is, possibly, is he believes that the universe is all mental and the physical universe is a creation of a supreme mind, that is the mind of God. Now, therein is where the difference may be, because what exactly does that mean? Does he believe that God, like, literally and consciously dreamt us all up, like created us in a dream that he consciously constructed? Because that's not what we believe. In our system, in the Neo-Genian system, we believe that that there is a supreme mind, but that's a network mind. And so we're all nodes in this network mind. And so we all form this network mind. And so we all are this network mind and unconsciously generate the material world through a process of dialectical and teleological evolution, transforming energy patterns. So it's not like it's not like a God consciously decides, I'm going to create the universe. Rather, we as a collective of minds self-generate from our own internal frequency patterns in an unconscious process, the pattern of reality that we then explore through ourselves. So similar but different. And I don't know. It's just always strange that they go to theism quite often. But I don't know anything about him, but just based on the fact that it says he's a pastor. But let's see what this video says, because I have not seen this video yet. I have not seen it. And I'm curious what they have to say.
Keith, as a non-materialist, somebody who believes in the fundamental nature of consciousness, that consciousness is not only what the brain delivers, how do you explain it? If consciousness has something other than the brain, what's the stuff?
Okay, so we'll see what he has to say. But, let's talk about it in terms of our system. This individual, what's this guy's name? Is it Robert? Kuhn? I think this guy's name is Kuhn. Robert Lawrence Kuhn. Okay, so this is Kuhn. I don't know what Kuhn believes, but Kuhn is basically saying, okay, if you believe that the mind is something different from the brain, or that consciousness is something different from the brain, and therefore not matter or not material, then what is it? What is it exactly? So of course, in our system, we know that mind is defined as mathematical frequency patterns. And so sinusoidal waves. So these are sinusoidal wave patterns. These are, and the reason why that this is considered mind is because they exist within us as our composition as minds. Within us, we are containers of these frequencies. And the material world is generated from the interaction of these frequencies. And the reason why that the world that is generated from them is not truly material is because matter is usually conceptualized as something that exists independently from the mind. That's the whole point of materialism. The whole point of materialism is that matter is fundamental. Therefore, matter can exist apart from the mind, because the mind is just derivative of matter. It's an epiphenomenon of the brain. However, in our concept of existence, everything is mind, and thus anything that appears to be matter does not exist independently from the mind. It is formed from the frequencies of mind. So just he's like saying, well, what is this stuff? To answer the question, the stuff is mind, which is frequency, which arranges itself into patterns that we experience as matter. Just like when we go to sleep and dream, we experience the pattern of our dream world as matter. So anyway, but let's see what Keith has to say. I'm curious. I don't know anything about him. I'd love to hear.
If you ask the question, what is consciousness made out of? What stuff is it made out of? I think you're presupposing that materialism is true. There has to be some stuff that it's made out of.
So it's an interesting idea. He's saying if you're asking what, and I'm going to use the term consciousness just because he's probably going to use the term consciousness a lot. But just to be clear, we need to make a distinction between consciousness and sentience. Consciousness and sentience are not the same thing. What they're actually talking about is sentience, not consciousness per se. Consciousness is a higher form of an awareness that entails awareness of awareness. So sentience is just awareness. Like, animals and insects and fish and, all these different creatures, they are sentient in that they are aware. When they're hungry, they feel hungry. They have awareness. They're able to have subjective experiences. They can experience qualia. Consciousness is awareness of awareness. And human beings exhibit consciousness, which means, oh, I am explicitly aware that I am aware of things. That's the self-reflective property of self-awareness. When you go, oh, I am hungry, rather than just feeling hungry, you go, oh, I am hungry. You are consciously aware of the fact that you are aware of something. And this is a very powerful tool. It's what allows us to plan for the future. For example, we can think, oh, I am going to go on a vacation next week and buy a bouquet of flowers for my partner. And you can plan for the future because you're able to think about thought structures. You can think about awareness. You're aware of awareness rather than just being locked into a simple direct awareness of things. But anyways, so when they say consciousness, they really mean just like sentience or subjective experience in general. I'm, for the sake of not having to explain that every single time, we'll just go with their word. So when explaining consciousness, he's saying that, well, to ask what it's made out of presupposes that everything is material and things have to be made of something. First of all, yes and no. I think that to think that it has to be made of something material presupposes materialism, but everything does have to be made of something. Everything does have to have a structure in some way, or rather, I think rather than saying being made of something, I think a better way to put it is in terms of the principle sufficient reason. For everything that exists, there has to be an explanation for how it exists in the way that it does. So, for example, if I say that, minds exist, I need to be able to give you an explanation for how minds exist to follow the principle of sufficient reason. There must be a reason why minds exist or how minds exist in the way that they do, rather than just saying it, oh, well, they do because they do. They do because they do because they do. Now, some people do take that route, but we don't take that route. We take that route. We take the route of the principle of sufficient reason, where we explain necessarily why the rules of reason, why the rules of mathematics, why the rules of logic necessarily must exist and have to exist, and can exist, and how this gives rise to the structure of a mind. And we don't have time to do all that right now, but we can follow a logical progression step by step, understanding how mathematics begins to organize itself, how it introduces motion, sinusoidal wave patterns, and this gives rise to dimensionality. We can follow a step-by-step process to understand how mind is structured. Now, some idealists don't do this. We as idealists, we do. We predicate everything on the principle of sufficient reason, so everything must have a sufficient reason for the way that exists in the way that it does. Quick and easy way to understand this is through the concept of zero. How do minds exist? This is more of like an intuitive way to grasp it, but it's real quick. I can throw it out there real quick. How do minds exist? Well, minds are ultimately mathematically equivalent to zero. That's why we call them zetas, because they are one infinite zero. Minds are equivalent to zeros, which means they are mathematically equivalent to nothingness, and nothingness requires nothing for its existence. Therefore, it exists eternally. Why are they zeros? Because they contain infinite energy with both balanced positive and negative energy. Since all the balanced energy is both positive and negative, it contains infinite energy within itself, but it balances to zero. This is equivalent to nothingness, and nothingness must exist because there's nothing to prevent nothing from existence. You can't stop nothingness from existing because it's perfectly self-contained within itself and has everything necessary for its existence within. So, kind of a quick and dirty way to understand that intuitively. But you see, you get my point, right? It's not just like, oh, well, they exist because. However, there are some idealists that take a position kind of like that, where they go, hey, look, if you try and say that matter explains everything in existence, you run into all these problems, like the hard problem of consciousness, which is like, where did consciousness come from? Or mind or sentience come from? How is it possible? Doesn't seem to be possible in the materialist paradigm. So what some materialists or idealists do is they say, hey, look, if you presuppose materialism is true, if you presuppose that matter is true, then you get all these problems. However, if you presuppose that mind is fundamental and mind is true, then you don't have these problems anymore. All these problems that you had in materialism are solved. So their argument is more like, look, if you believe materialism to be true, you have all these problems. If you believe idealism to be true, you don't have these problems. So idealism is probably true. You see, they're not really giving an explanation as to why or how idealism is the fundamental substance of existence, but rather they're just basically appealing to the fact that it solves problems. So that's what, I don't know if that's his position or not. That's what some idealists propose. While it is true, that is absolutely true. In the Neo-Genian system, we go a step further than this by not just saying, oh, well, if you take it to be true, it solves problems. We give reasons for why it is true fundamentally as the ground of existence, why it's the self-grounding ground of existence.
Materialists like Dan Dennett talk about spooky stuff, very thin stuff, but it's not stuff at all, of course. Stuff, I suppose, is something you locate in space and that has solidity, so you might define it in various ways. But consciousness is not in space and it doesn't have solidity, so it's not made of stuff. Consciousness is spiritual, as to use the word which will raise everyone's hackles, perhaps.
So he's being a little loose with the word stuff. He's saying that consciousness isn't made of stuff because it's not floating around in space somewhere. Well, consciousness is certainly not made of matter, and he's also right that it's not floating around in space somewhere. But you can still be made of a so what the real word that we're talking about here is substance. He's right that consciousness is not of a material substance and it's not floating around in space somewhere. But that doesn't mean that it isn't its own substance, which it is. And so what does he say? He's saying it. Hold on, let me see exactly what he's saying here.
Consciousness is spiritual.
See, he's saying that consciousness is spiritual. But the question is, and let's see if he talks about it, what does one mean by spiritual? You can't just start swapping words around. You have to explain, okay, well, if it's spiritual, what does that mean? In our system, we absolutely can say that the immaterial aspect of existence is spiritual. We can say that if we'd like to. I don't often. Sometimes I do, but oftentimes I don't, to avoid like a religious connotation. But you could say that it's spiritual, but we have a precise definition for that. Spiritual being defined as mind in terms of mathematical frequency patterns, oscillating waveforms. And this has a dimensionality, a frequency dimensionality. It's not a material dimensionality, but it has a dimension of frequency. It has, and when I say a dimension of frequency, I'm not talking in terms of units. In terms of units, it is dimensionless, but in terms of extension, it has dimensionality in terms of one dimension. That's a little beyond the scope of this video. But I just want to point out, let's see what he says, but I want to point out that like it's not enough to just be like, oh, it's just spiritual stuff. You have to explain, well, what is, and I think that that's a lot of, and he might give a good explanation. We'll see. We're only 1 minute into this. He might give a good explanation, but I think that that's one reason why a lot of idealists might go to the idea of a theistic God, is because they go, okay, well, reality can't be material. Therefore, it must be mental / spiritual, but we don't really know what the spiritual stuff is. So it must be, God must have the answers or something. You know, like I think that it's, humans tend to, when they can't answer something, want to go to God, want to just be like, oh, well, God then is the answer. We know reality is not material. It must be spiritual. What is that? I don't know. God must be the answer. I don't know if that's his position or not, but I feel like that might be why a lot of idealists go with theism, which is really unfortunate, because just because reality isn't material and that it is spiritual or mental doesn't automatically mean that a God created. We can understand its structure and substance in terms of reason. We can rationally understand it as a mind that is structuring itself in terms of that being our being and our essence and our substance.
To use the word which will raise everyone's hackles, perhaps, but that is to say, it is not material. So anything which is not material is not made of stuff.
So it's not material. Absolutely right. Agreed. Now, when he says anything that's not material is not made of stuff, I don't know what he means by stuff. Everything has to have some kind of structure or substance, or at least reason for being. So mind certainly is stuff, but it's mind stuff, not matter stuff. It's still stuff, but it's not matter stuff. It's mind stuff. So it's also hard sometimes because the barrier of language, like what does he mean by stuff? I don't know what he means by stuff. I can get a pretty good idea of what he's talking about based on the context, but what I mean to say is here, sometimes people will be talking about the same thing and not even know it because of different definitions for different words. But let's continue and see what else Keith has to say.
Is it a substance?
Yay! Great question. Is it a substance? So I'm really curious to see how he answers this, because yes, it should be a substance. So let's see. Well, I mean, it is a substance, but I'm curious to see if Keith agrees. So let's see.
Substance is another word with a long philosophical history. I think that you...
Is it a mirage? Is a metaphor? Is it more?
No, it's not a metaphor. Consciousness is ultimately real.
It's real.
Yeah.
It's something.
So he's having a hard time with saying it's a substance. It is a substance. It's not a material substance, it's a mental substance. But any philosopher, it says that he's a British philosopher. So he should know very well in metaphysical terms what is he must. It'd be silly if he didn't know what a substance is. Substance doesn't automatically imply matter. Substance, what substance means is, substance is a fancy word of saying stuff. When you're asking what is the substance of existence, you're asking what's the stuff that makes up existence. So there's nothing wrong with saying mind stuff. Mental substance is what is the foundation of existence. So he's having a hard time saying that mind is substance for some reason, but he's saying that mind is real. So that's how he's qualifying. Well, I don't know if I want to say it's a substance, but it's real. So let's continue.
Something real. It's more than metaphor.
Yeah.
It's not stuff if you define stuff as occupying space and time.
Right.
Okay, my kind of stuff is actually broader than space and time. My kind of stuff is anything that's real.
Okay, so Kuhn, again, don't know anything about Kuhn, but so far, I agree with Kuhn's definition of stuff. Kuhn says that his definition of stuff is broader than just space and time. It's, how did he phrase it? Anything that's real. More or less, yeah. So so far, am agreeing with Kuhn's definitions. I don't know what Kuhn's position is, though, but let's see.
Right.
Okay, my kind of stuff is actually broader than space and time. My kind of stuff is anything that's real.
Okay, well, in that case, it is real. But the content of consciousness are things like thoughts, sense perceptions, sights, sounds, feels,
Sure.
etc., feelings.
All of these things I
all of
can
these
get
things.
from my brain.
Okay, so agreed. Mind has different aspects. It has a formal aspect and it has a content aspect to it. The formal aspect is its mathematical structure, so like the structure of the sinusoid, and its content aspect is the qualitative aspect, or the quality, or what it is like to experience that, which is like redness or pain or happiness or any sort of subjective experience, qualia. But anyway, what Kuhn says though now, Kuhn says, oh, well, I can get all of that from my brain. That's not true. So I'm thinking Kuhn is a materialist, maybe based on that. But Kuhn is saying I can get all that from my brain. No, you absolutely can't. There is no way that materialism can show that the brain can somehow generate the experience of red. Sure, you can have certain synapses that fire and neurons firing and information being transmitted from, the light rays entering your eyes and transmitting that information to the brain. But none of that explains how the sensation of red can arise. It can't, and it doesn't. Because ultimately materialists look at the brain as like a complicated machine. So it works, think of a machine like that has cogs and wheels. Imagine, and this is a famous thought experiment put out by Leibniz called Leibniz's mill, who said, imagine that you go into a big machine and you're looking at all the gears turning and cranks turning, right? Where in all the gears and cranks is subjective experience suddenly going to appear? Like the experience of redness and like, how can cranks and gears generate an internal subjective experience? It can't. Like if you think about it that way, obviously it's absurd. But if you remember that the brain is considered in materialist terms to be the same type of thing, just more complicated. Basically, the point is, it doesn't matter how complicated you make it. Fundamentally, you can't get internality out of something that has no internal aspect to it. It's impossible. So anyway, no, you can't. It's a logical impossibility to get that from the brain. And if he's going to say, oh, well, I can just get that from the brain, then he better very well be able to explain how you get that from the brain, because no materialist ever has been able to present a logical, satisfactory answer to how the brain could generate the mind, because it can't. So let's continue.
No, you can't.
That's funny. I just gave like a that was a good answer. I like it.
Feelings.
All of these things I
all of
can
these
get
things.
from my brain.
No, you can't. No, you're presupposing materialism if you say that. I mean, all you say is, if my brain works in certain ways, then these things occur in consciousness. That's a correlation. You're
Yes.
not getting
fair.
that from your brain.
Right.
Yeah, agreed. This is, I'm looking at how long this is taking, so I'm going to let him talk a little more, because I could just stop and talk about this for hours and hours. But yeah, agreeing.
Now, of course, I'm not wanting to deny that in fact, most of our experiences are channeled through the brain. That is to say, the brain has a causal role in producing them.
So basically, there's a correlation between mind and brain, but it's not the same thing, which means like, for example, pain. When you feel pain, there are perhaps certain, neurons that fire, synapses that occur that is associated with pain. But it doesn't mean that that is what causes, or that's not what generates the sensation of pain. It's what goes along with it. And I'm trying to think of a good example, because this is the fallacy of correlation does not imply causation. So this is the idea that just because two things are correlated doesn't mean that one causes the other. And I guess a way, this isn't the best example, but imagine you're playing a video game and you have the controller and you're moving your character around the screen. Well, your character is going to be correlated to you, because when you want your character to move left, well, you're going to move the joystick left. And when you want your character to jump, you're going to tap the A button. So the character's motions are correlated to your actions, but it does not mean that those characters' actions are causing your movements, let's say. This isn't a perfect example, but this is a hard one to bring up an analogy real quick. But yeah, like, it's not though when your character moves left, it's causing your finger to move left. And when your character jumps, it's not causing your finger to push. So correlation doesn't necessarily imply causation. So the idea here is that the brain is correlated to the mind. There are many things that occur in the brain that accompany subjective experience, but it doesn't mean that the brain is responsible for the capacity to have subjective experiences.
But I am wanting to say that the brain itself produces something that is not material. Right.
Okay. How does that happen? Does the brain itself produce something that's not material, or is there something material coming from outside the brain that sort of combines with the brain?
But again, terms like outside. I mean, the difficulty here is is just to see that material terms are not going to apply to consciousness. So you're not getting, people talk about consciousness being in the brain or in the head, because it's not in anywhere.
Okay, fair enough. I accept that.
Yeah. Well, I think it just is the case that our brain works. And
okay, so I keep pausing this a lot, I know, but so essentially he's having a little hard time talking about this idea of the mind being in the brain or whatever. So let me tell you in our system real quick what it is. We are all immaterial minds. We are all zetas. We are all systems of frequency. So we don't exist in the material domain, what we call the holos. We exist in the frequency domain. And existing in the frequency domain means that when we interface with an avatar, and we're able to interface with an avatar because everything is mathematically structured. Avatars are space-time functions. Minds are frequency functions. Frequency functions can interact and interface with the space-time function. So a mind is not in the brain. A mind is in its own domain, in its own dimension, the frequency domain. But we experience reality as if we were right behind our eyes, because this is how the information that we're receiving is being subjectively experienced by us as a mind in the frequency domain. It's a lot like putting on a VR headset. Let's say you're in your bedroom. And you put on your VR headset. When you put on your VR headset, you're transported to, let's say, to Mars, right? You're transported to Mars. You put on your VR headset and you're in a virtual Mars world. Well, are you actually on Mars? No, you're not actually on Mars. You're still in your bedroom, but you're experiencing reality through your headset as if you were on Mars. So same thing here. You as a mind are experiencing reality through your virtual. It's real, but it's, real in the sense that it is has veridical experience, veridical substance. It's veridical. So you are experiencing reality as though you are in the material world, but you're not actually in your head somewhere. You are in the frequency domain. You've simply interfaced with an avatar that is providing you frequency information that's allowing you to experience this domain of existence. When you go to sleep and dream, you're tuning into another domain. So you can see how you can tune into different domains. So when you go to sleep and dream, it's like, oh, I'm in Antarctica now, but you're not actually, or I'm in space now, or whatever. You're not actually. At all times, you are always located in the frequency domain as an eternal mind, a system of frequencies, but you are having different perceptions, different types of experiences, depending on what information you're tuning into, what kind of headset you're putting on, or what game you're playing in your headset.
And we speak, right? But if you say, are those just waves, sound waves in the air produced by purely physical organs? Well, they're partly that. But when you understand the words that you say, that's not a physical process any longer. So there's something physical which mediates information and understanding.
You are calling consciousness spiritual.
Yeah.
I don't find that particularly pejorative, but I want to understand what you mean by it.
Yeah, let's curious to see what this is. So often, mind was very often considered to be spiritual. And the mind was considered to be, in philosophy, for quite a while, they would use like mind and soul in a synonymous way. The subjective aspect of us, our mind, was the soul in philosophy for a long time. It's only really with the rise of materialism, scientific materialism, that these ideas got separated, because it's like, oh, well, no, the mind is something that the brain makes, and the spiritual is that just like, oh, crazy, weird, woo-woo stuff. Whereas mind is spiritual in the sense that it is immaterial, in the sense that it is mental and not part of space-time. It doesn't mean it's like magical and mystical and defies explanation. No, we can rationally understand it perfectly fine mathematically. We can understand it perfectly rationally and mathematically, and we can experience it. It's not outside of our understanding. It's not something that God is waving his magical wand around, making happen, that defies all laws. No, nothing like that. It's perfectly rationally understandable. So let's see.
Non-material, and it is something that's real.
So something real and non-material, I agree. He's defining spiritual.
But it doesn't have the properties of material things, like being spatially locatable, like having mass, you can touch it.
Right, so these are all negative characteristics. Can you give me any
So I agree with all this.
positive characteristic?
So he's like, okay, you're telling me everything that it isn't, right? You're telling me everything that something spiritual or immaterial isn't. He's saying it's not located in space. It's not located with mass. Can you tell me things that it is? And so, like in terms of our system, mind is that which is, positive attributes rather than being negative attributes, is that they are one-dimensional dynamic points that are moving in sinusoidal trajectories that form a Fourier basis, waves that are able to interact and combine to create frequency functions. It's a system of living mathematics in motion, and it is immaterial because everything is matter is considered as that which is independent from mind. This is not independent from mind. This is mind itself. Anything that seems material is generated as a projection, as a Fourier projection of these frequency patterns. So he's absolutely right to say, like, okay, you can't just give me negative attributes. You have to give me positive attributes. In our system, those are the positive attributes. It's a system of frequency patterns in terms of 1D points in motion in the frequency domain that form a Fourier basis set that is able to interact and combine into various frequency functions, which ultimately gives rise to the illusion of space, time, and matter through the projections of these wave combinations. So let's see what let's see what Keith has to say.
Yeah, what I'm feeling now, my state of ecstatic happiness that I'm in, that is.
But what's causing that?
Yeah, see, so it's interesting. I agree with Keith's positions, but Kuhn is asking very important questions that Keith isn't really answering. And I think that's, and I don't know Keith, and I don't want to speak about things that I don't know, but I'd imagine that's probably why he leans towards, it says he's a pastor, so I'm assuming a theist of some kind, because there are things that he can't answer. Like, well, okay, you told me what spiritual stuff isn't, but what is it? And he doesn't really have an answer. And Kuhn is saying, well, you got to give me something here. So let's see.
I'm trying to, I mean, that's the phenomenological expression of it, granted. And it's partially your brain. Some people say it's all the brain. You say it's partially the brain. And there's something else that has a spiritual component. I want to know what that spiritual component is. Can you say anything more about it other than what it's not?
I'm really puzzled by your question, Robert, because if you ask this about material things, you could press the same sort of question and say, well, what is it that makes one thing cause another? What do you mean by causality? And what in the end do you mean by solidity? Doesn't it all...
He has a point to some degree, because you could say the same thing about matter, but he's still not giving a very good explanation of immaterial substance. But he's basically saying, what he's trying to say is, well, you could say the same thing about matter. What is, for example, like I go, okay, well, what is matter made of? And you go, well, what do you mean? It's matter. Well, yeah, but what is matter? Well, it's the stuff that's all, it's also hard to pin down. But that's a big point in our system, is that when you start to probe matter like that, you realize that there is no good answer for what matter is, because matter is an illusion that ultimately is generated from mind, which is the substance of existence, which is a mathematically structured reality. It's a logically, mathematically, rationally structured reality that is going through all of its possible transformations and permutations as it experiences itself. So it's a system of living reason that automatically has a qualitative aspect associated with it. It has a qualitative aspect associated with it. I don't have time to get into all the details right now, because I want to keep going through this video, but essentially it's because when it comes to understanding that reality is a system of reason, there is nothing that is contradictory or breaks reason by having the existence of qualia or subjective experience. Therefore, subjective experience has to be a aspect of the system, because it has the possibility of existing, and there's nothing to prevent it from existing. So it has to exist on a rational and logical level. All the preconditions for its existence are there, and all the sufficient conditions are necessary for its existence. So it must exist. It has to exist, because the only thing that it needs to exist is rational structure, but rational structure is there in terms of mathematical sinusoids. So the sufficient conditions for its existence are present, and so it can exist.
So you could ask the same questions. I don't think they're proper questions.
Okay, I'm going to try to find a proper question. Let me try to find one. So as I hear it, consciousness is spiritual.
I'm actually I think Kuhn has I think Keith is right, but I think Kuhn is asking very important questions that Keith is kind of sidestepping.
And I have a feeling now that I'm a bit hot. You have a feeling that you're totally ecstatic. It's different. We have different expressions of our consciousness. Both of our brains are helping in that. But if there's a spiritual component to consciousness, then we have a different kind of consciousness. And so now we've learned something, that consciousness can split into parts, at least two parts, you and me. I don't know about these other people that went around the world.
So I'm not exactly sure what he means, but I think he's saying that if we think of consciousness as spiritual, then consciousness can be broken into parts, because I have a subjective experience and you have a subjective experience, and they're different. So it seems like it can be broken into parts. Well, in our system, this is true to a certain degree, because we exist as in a network mind. We are all individual zetas, or individual souls, or individual minds that exist within a network. So I have a particular experience and you have a particular experience because we are both unique zetas. We are both unique souls. We are both unique minds. So Kuhn has a unique soul and a unique mind and unique experiences. And Keith has a unique mind and unique experiences and a unique subjectivity because they are both individual zetic minds. And so in that sense, there are units of mind or units of consciousness, if you want to use that word. I wouldn't use the word consciousness, but units of mind. So I got to say, Kuhn is doing a great job with the questions. Keith has the correct position, but not, the questions could be handled better.
I don't think there's one thing called consciousness which splits into parts. And
so you have one and I have one, separate ones.
Yeah.
Oh, okay. Well, this is progress.
It's true. It's true.
I have a separate piece.
Okay.
I have a separate something, and you have a separate something.
Well, if you ask what my consciousness now is, then I'd say it consists of a finite visual field, which is elliptical in shape and contains colored patches. I have thoughts which are framed in my mind, which I'm not going to tell you about, and then I've got some thoughts which come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Then I've got some feelings that I have. So all these things are members of one consciousness. Now, the big philosophical question is, what makes these things parts of my consciousness? But not only are they not parts of your consciousness, you don't even know what's going on.
Right.
Yeah. So no, that is a question, and I don't know if Keith has an answer to that question. But like I said, in our system, that is because we are individual zetas. So I have my thoughts, and you have your thoughts, because you have a specific set of frequencies associated with you, and I have a specific set of frequencies associated with me. And especially when we start interfacing with our brains and avatars, when we interface with an avatar and the brain, then our perceptual field gets filtered quite a lot. So that also is what further partitions us, but it doesn't it partitions us in a way that it localizes us. We're already particular. Okay, so there is the universal network mind that particularizes itself into individual zetic nodes. And that's where our particularity comes from. That's where our uniqueness comes from. And then bodies are what allow us to exist in a localized existence. So we go from universal to particular to localization. So the universal network has particular nodes that localize. And localize means, in a certain body, at a certain place, in a certain area, at a certain time.
And in principle cannot.
And in principle you cannot. There is no instrument you could use, not even an electroencephalogram, to find out what I...
And no instrument even in principle.
Not even in principle. That's
right.
Yeah, so no instrument in principle to what? To detect mind? Is that what he's... Let me hear that again.
And in principle you cannot. There is no instrument. Thoughts which are framed in my mind, which I'm not going to tell you about, and then I've got some thoughts which come out of my mouth.
Yeah.
Then I've got some feelings that I have. So all these things are members of one consciousness. Now, the big philosophical question is, what makes these things parts of my consciousness? But not only are they not parts of your consciousness, you don't even know what's going on.
Right. And in principle cannot.
And in principle you cannot. There is no instrument you could use, not even an electroencephalogram, to find out what I...
And no instrument even in principle.
Yeah, so this is basically saying that you cannot have a physical instrument to detect mental phenomena, which is true. You can detect correlations of the mental phenomena. So, for example, there are certain ways that the brain lights up when you experience pain. So we can set up some device that measures pain, but what it's measuring is not actually pain. It's measuring what the physical body does in response to pain. Let's say that you were someone who enjoys pain. So if you enjoyed pain, even though your brain and the scans that you were doing or whatever instrument you were hooked up to would say, pain is occurring right now, maybe you're taking pleasure in it. And what the system, and even that could have certain kind of correlations as well. But what I'm trying to get across is there's a difference between measuring the mechanics of the body and the experience of the thing. So there's nothing that I don't know and can't know what it is like to be you having the experiences that you do. I could know what it's like to be me having similar experiences, but I don't know exactly what kind of experiences, what it is to experience. And that's essentially more or less what's getting across here, is that you cannot have physical instruments detect directly subjective experience. And that is true. You can detect the correlations, but not the subjective experience itself.
Not even in principle. That's
Right.
what I'd say.
So, Keith, what is it that we need to combine with the brain to make this non-material consciousness?
What is it that we need to combine with the brain to? So in our system, you don't need to combine. Subjectivity is eternal. We as eternal minds are eternal. We as zetas are eternal. It's not like you combine something with the brain that creates the mind. The mind is eternal, and it interfaces with the brain to be able to use it as a means to localize and experience the space-time domain in the holos. And specifically, it's a mathematical frequency function interacting with a mathematical space-time function. So let's see what Keith has to say, though. I'm curious.
Well, you need what Buddhists would say is thoughts and feelings and sensations and perceptions. And this is a stream of, believe it or not, consciousness. And that is something which is at least partly produced by the brain. It's causally correlated with events in the brain, that is to say. But it also has its own psychical or spiritual or mental forms of causation. Right, let me give you one example.
So what Keith is saying is right, but he's explaining it in a very vague and general way. So I could absolutely see Kuhn getting frustrated and be like, you're not telling me anything right now. And I think that that's kind of the whole idea here that I'm getting across from this interview, is that Keith is right in a lot of what he's saying, but he's not giving very good answers or explanations as to why his positions are the way that they are, or why they should be considered right. And Kuhn is asking very, very good questions that he's not really getting very satisfactory answers to. So Keith, good position on Keith. Great questions from Kuhn.
If I go through a mathematical calculation, I don't know what's happening in my brain at all, and I don't believe that when I get a logically correct result, and I say, amazingly, 2 + 2 does equal 4, I don't believe that is produced by purely physical laws in the brain. That is a logical calculation, and there are laws of thought which produce it, so that's what you need.
So that's very interesting. So he's talking about this is great. So Keith, yeah, I like that. He's talking about the laws of thought, and he's talking about like mathematical calculations dealing with laws of thought, and laws of thought being associated with mathematical calculations, and this being beyond the brain. And this is, getting quite in the, on target here, because mind is a living system of mathematics. It's mathematical frequency. So mind can engage in mathematical processes, and the laws of thought follow the laws of mathematics, because the laws of thought it is mathematics. It's living mathematics. So yeah, that's great. I could still see Kuhn getting a little frustrated because he explained in a little bit of a general way. But yeah, essentially, I agree.
So, Keith, do you need something like a soul to combine with the brain?
So you do need something with like a soul to combine with the brain. You need a soul, which is a zeta, which is a mind, to interface with the brain for that brain soul symbiotic relationship, synergistic relationship to happen. The brain and the soul, yes, interact. So Kuhn is correct. Yes, the soul and the brain have to interact. The soul being a system of frequencies that exists in the frequency domain, and the soul being, is that what I said? The soul being a system of frequency, and the avatar or the body or the brain existing in the space-time domain.
To make consciousness?
That's a loaded word. I think the most important distinction I would make is between the laws of physics which are mechanical in the sense they're not directed, they're not for the sake of anything, they're just proceeding in accordance with mathematical equations, etc. Okay, so they're blind, they're not leading anywhere. To contrast the laws of physics with the laws of thought, which you use in mathematical calculations, for example, when you are aiming at a result,
Yeah, so he's talking about teleology, where he's talking about the laws of physics that just follow like mechanistic cause and effect, whereas mental processes are teleological. So they have a certain thing that you're trying to do, something that you're trying to aim for. If you're trying to solve a mathematical problem, there is a goal you're trying to get to. So it's not just, blind. It's not, there's teleology, purposefulness, directedness embedded within it. So that's absolutely right. Great example. I like that. But this actually applies to the whole, in our system, it applies to the whole universe. When physics seems like it's blind, it isn't actually, because everything is ultimately mind, which means everything is ultimately teleological. Everything is actually purpose-driven. So yes, in a materialist concept, physics is blind. In our concept, idealist concept of reality, the element of materialism is also driven by teleology. But anyway, his examples are really, I like that. Great example.
You've got some calculations and you want to get the correct result. You've got a criterion of correctness. You're going to either right or wrong. Laws of physics aren't concerned with whether you're right or wrong. So that evaluative element, I'm right or wrong.
So he's talking about evaluation, like the laws of physics just do what they do, whereas the laws of thought go, oh, I'm trying to get this right. I didn't get it right. I got it wrong. Let me try again. So he's showing that there are laws of thoughts, but the laws of thoughts operate in a different way. And this now just gets in the distinction between idealism and materialism.
Or wrong. And that logical process of thought, that I'm going to do this because one thought leads to another, and I don't care what's happening in my brain. Now, there must be some correlation between the brain and the laws of thought, but my point, and I think it's a very strong point, I have to say, is that the laws of mathematical and logical thinking are not reducible to or stateable in terms of laws of physics.
This is great, and I think that this is his strongest point, that the mathematical laws, logical laws are not reducible to matter, essentially. He says laws of physics, but I would say matter, that they're not reducible to matter. Mathematical laws, logical laws are not reducible to matter. And that, I think, is his strongest point out of this whole interview, because that's exactly right. And that's why the laws of logic and mathematics, that is mind. So, when Kuhn is asking, well, what's the substance? What's it's made out of? You could say, well, living mathematics or living mind or living reason. It is mind, reason, mathematics that is able to experience and structure itself. So Keith is definitely in the right. Well, let's see what.
Or of any known science. And so there must at least be two completely different ways of understanding what human beings are, a physical way and a way concerned with thinking, and I would say feeling and perception as well. And these, you have to put these two together, and I believe that nobody on earth knows how to do that.
Well, wait, no, hold on one more time. What does he think no one knows how to do?
I think it's a very strong point, I have to say, is that the laws of mathematical and logical thinking are not reducible to or stateable in terms of laws of physics or of any known science. And so there must at least be two completely different ways of understanding what human beings are, a physical way and a way concerned with thinking, and I would say feeling and perception as well. And these, you have to put these two together, and I believe that nobody on earth knows how to do that.
Okay, well, everything he said is absolutely right up to the very last sentence. Nobody on earth knows how to do this? No, of course, we can easily know how to do this. How do you put the laws of mind and correlate that to the laws of matter? Well, you understand that one is just an expression of the other. We experience this every night when we go to sleep and dream. Our mind generates the realm of matter. Now, how are these two different realms associated with each other? Well, it's because they're all the same thing. Everything is ultimately mathematics. It's just mathematics being presented in a different way. So we're all frequency functions. We are all frequencies. And through a Fourier transform, you can represent frequency information as space and time information. And so it's basically just in short, without getting into too much detail, everything is living mathematics. Everything is living reason. Everything is living mind. but it can be structured in a different way. So how do they interact? How does a space-time, body, and brain interact with an immaterial soul or mind? Because they are both structures of mathematics, and so they're able to have a link. They're able to have an interface. They're able to interact. There's no substance dualism going on. There is no interaction problem. They are able to interact because they are of the same substance, just expressed in a different way. And that's the important thing to understand. They are the same substance, just expressed in a different way. Therefore, they are able to interact with each other. It's kind of like water and ice. If you imagine a pool of water and chunks of ice floating in that pool of water, imagine water being mind and then the ice being matter. The ice is just transformed water, or matter is just transformed mind. And water and ice can interact with each other. And mind and matter can interact with each other in a very specific way. And the way that they interact is their relationship between a frequency function interacting with a space-time function. So even though they are in different domains, an interaction is able to occur because they are both correlated by mathematical information and mathematical structure, which allows that interaction to occur. Was there anything else to this? No, that was the end. Okay, so agreed up until the very last sentence when he says, like, you can't understand. You absolutely can't understand why. And that's probably one reason why maybe he's a pastor and a theist, because, oh, well, I can't understand it. So God in his mysterious ways must be the orchestrator of all this. I don't know if that's the case, but it's possible that's the case. So anyway, I think that this was a very interesting interview. I agree with most, not the last sentence, but I agree with most of what Keith says. But I thought that the questions that Kuhn asked were the absolute right questions to ask. And I think a lot of the times Keith didn't give the most satisfactory of answers to someone like Kuhn, who is looking for these very explicit mechanics. Basically basically Keith is in the right ballpark, but Kuhn is really using the principle of sufficient reason. He's trying to find the sufficient reason behind everything. Okay, well, you say that mind is the only thing that exists. Well, how does it exist? You say it's spiritual. What is spiritual? How does something spiritual interact with something material like the brain? He's using the PSR. And so it's interesting because they both kind of have half the equation, where Keith is right in the right ballpark, but Kuhn is engaging in logical thought processes that are necessary for fully elucidating this information. And that's why in our system of meta-rationalism, in the Neo-Genian system, we talk about meta-rationalism as being the new science, the science of the new mind, the new science of mind. And we call it the new science of mind because we want to understand metaphysics rationally, and we want to be able to put these metaphysical ideas on firm ground. Because, yeah, you're not really going to be taken seriously if you get asked questions like this and you just go, well, it just exists because we can't explain how it doesn't, or I don't know, just kind of vague and general answers. We need to be able to explain the laws of thought, the laws of mind, and immaterial existence as well, just as good as we can explain physical laws. And we're able to do this in meta-rationalism by elucidating the mathematical structure of existence and the frequency patterns that underlie reality and how they behave and structure themselves to give rise to a material existence. So really good interview. I thought it was interesting. Maybe we'll watch. Let me know if you like videos like this, by the way. I might do more reaction videos. They were kind of interesting. But we went on for a lot longer than I thought we would. But I hope you enjoyed that, my friends. And as always, this has been a members only video. I release one members only video to the public once a month. So maybe you'll see this, maybe you won't. But I want to give a big shout out to everyone who supports. Thank you all so much. I really appreciate it. Shout out to Renaissance Fairy, Cassidy, Angela, the Halloween Mom, DB, Fashida, Enki, Nusalina, Masam, Eric, Christopher, the Eternal Empire, and Joel, and everyone else. Thank you all very much.